The ballroom was filled with golden light, laughter, and the sound of expensive glasses touching. Rich people in elegant dresses and sharp tuxedos stood under sparkling chandeliers, their voices blending like a storm of pride. Everyone was waiting for the music to begin, but the piano in the center of the room stood silent, as if it too was holding its breath. At the far corner, a young janitor stood in his plain blue uniform and yellow gloves. His job was simple: clean the hall, polish the floor, and make sure no dust dared to touch the shining piano. To the guests, he was invisible. To them, he was only a shadow moving silently across the marble tiles. But tonight would not be like other nights. Tonight, something unexpected was waiting to happen. The host of the evening was a billionaire heiress. She had golden hair and a red silk dress that shimmered like fire every time she moved. Her laughter was sharp, her words even sharper. People loved her charm, but they also feared her tongue. When she spoke, silence followed. She walked to the piano and touched the keys with her painted fingers, not to play but to show she could. Then she turned, her eyes finding the janitor who was standing quietly, watching the scene with calm respect. "You there," she said loudly, her voice echoing through the hall. Everyone turned their heads. "Do you even know what this is?" "This is a piano. It takes more than dirty hands to make music." The guests laughed. The janitor lowered his eyes, saying nothing. He had faced laughter many times before. But this time, something different was burning inside him. The heiress continued, her smile growing cruel. "Tell me, janitor, can you play? Or do you only know how to scrub floors?" Whispers filled the room. Some guests laughed openly. Others waited, curious to see what would happen. The janitor looked at the piano, his eyes calm but shining. "Can play," he said softly. The words were so quiet that at first no one believed they heard him correctly. A ripple of surprise spread through the hall. The heiress raised her eyebrows, pretending to be amused. "You can play?" she repeated. Then she laughed loudly, throwing her head back. "Very well, let us make it more interesting." She pointed at him, her eyes glowing with mischief. "If you can play, I will marry you." The guests gasped. Some laughed at the absurdity. Others whispered in shock. The janitor stood still, his heart beating fast, but his face calm. He looked at the piano, then back at the heiress. "Are you serious?" he asked. "Of course," she replied, still laughing. "But be careful. If you fail, everyone will know you are nothing more than a fool in gloves." The janitor nodded slowly. He stepped forward, each movement echoing in the silent hall. His yellow gloves caught the light as he reached for the piano. He paused for a moment, as if listening to something no one else could hear. The heiress leaned back, her arms crossed. The guests leaned closer, their eyes wide. Nobody expected music from a janitor. Nobody believed he could even touch the keys properly. But as his fingers hovered above the piano, a strange silence filled the air. It was not just silence, it was expectation. The kind of silence before a storm, when the world knows something powerful is about to begin. The janitor closed his eyes. For a moment, memories flooded back. Memories of a small broken piano in his childhood home, of long nights practicing alone while the world slept, of dreams that never had a stage dot, and then, he pressed the first key. The note rang through the hall, deep and clear, cutting through the laughter like a sword. The guests froze. The heiress blinked, her smile fading just a little. Then came the second note, then the third. The janitor's hands, steady and sure, began to dance across the keys. The music rose like fire, soft at first, then growing, shaping the air into something no one in that room had ever heard before. The ballroom that once echoed with laughter now trembled with music. Every note was alive, telling the story of pain, hope, and dreams that refused to die. The guests stared, their mouths open. The heiress, for the first time that evening, could not find her laughter. The janitor played not like a servant, but like a master. His fingers moved faster, his body leaning with the rhythm, his heart pouring into every sound. The chandeliers above seemed to shine brighter, the air itself vibrating with the force of his genius, and as the last note rang out, long and beautiful, silence returned. But this time, it was not the silence of mockery. It was the silence of awe. The janitor lifted his hands from the keys. He looked at the heiress. She was no longer smiling. Her eyes were wide, her lips parted, as if she had seen a ghost. The guests did not laugh. They did not speak. They only stared at the man they had once called invisible. The unexpected war had begun, not of weapons, but of pride and music. Asterisk, the last note still hung in the air, trembling like a secret that refused to fade. No one moved. No one spoke. For the first time in years, the great ballroom was not filled with laughter or pride, but with something heavier, something stronger, respect. The janitor slowly lowered his hands, his chest rising and falling with quiet breaths. He did not bow, did not smile. He only looked around the hall, as if asking with his eyes, "Do you still see me as nothing?" The heiress in the red dress sat frozen, her mocking smile gone. Her eyes darted between the piano and the man standing beside it, as if she could not believe what she had just witnessed. The guests shifted uneasily, their perfect masks of arrogance slipping. Then a voice broke the silence. "Impossible," said one of the men in a black tuxedo. His voice cracked, as if he was not sure of his own words. He cannot play like that. He is only a janitor." The heiress stood, her hands shaking slightly, though she tried to hide it. She forced a laugh, but it was weaker now. "Well," she said, "it seems he has some talent, but talent is not enough. Anyone can play a few notes." The guests murmured, nodding quickly, eager to agree with her. None of them wanted to admit they had been wrong. None of them wanted to accept that someone from the lowest place among them had risen higher in a single moment. The janitor did not reply. He sat again at the piano, his face calm, his fingers steady. The murmurs fell into silence once more. He began to play again. This time, the music was not soft or cautious, it was bold. His hands flew across the keys with a power that filled the entire hall. The melody rose and fell like waves, sometimes gentle as a whisper, sometimes fierce as thunder. Each note carried weight, each chord carried truth. The guests leaned forward without meaning to. Their wine glasses stayed untouched, their conversations forgotten. Their eyes, once filled with mockery, now shone with something else, wonder. Eris clutched the edge of the piano, her red dress trembling with her body. The music wrapped around her, pulling at her heart in ways she had never known. She wanted to laugh again, to dismiss it, but the sound was too strong, too real. It was not music from a janitor. It was music from a soul on fire, a memory stirred. In her mind, she was a child again, sitting at her family's piano. Her teacher's hands guided hers, but no matter how many times she practiced, the music never lived. It was always empty, always cold. She had given up long ago. But now, hearing this man play, she felt what she had missed all her life. The truth of music that her chest ached, her throat closed. For the first time, she could not laugh. The janitor's eyes stayed closed. He was not playing for them. He was playing for himself, for the boy he once was, for the dreams he once buried. The piano was not just an instrument. It was his voice, and tonight, he was being heard. As the music grew, the chandeliers above seemed to vibrate, their crystals dancing with light. The air grew heavy, charged with something invisible. Even the richest men in the hall, men who had bought everything they wanted in life, felt poor in front of the sound. And then, slowly, the song softened. The storm became rain. The rain became silence. When he stopped, no one dared breathe. Eris stared at him, her lips parting but no words escaping. Her heart was racing. Her mind was shouting that this was wrong, that this was impossible. But her soul whispered the truth. She had just witnessed genius. The guests looked at one another, unsure what to do. Applaud? Speak? Laugh again? None of them could. Their pride was broken. Their certainty was gone. Finally, a single pair of hands began to clap. It was an older woman, dressed in silver. She stood, her eyes shining with tears, and clapped with steady rhythm. The sound echoed in the hall. One by one, others followed. Soon the entire hall was filled with applause, rising like thunder, shaking the very walls. The janitor stood, his face calm, his eyes still quiet. He did not bow. He only waited. The heiress could not move. She felt the weight of her own words pressing down on her. She had promised in front of everyone, if he could play, she would marry him. And now he had played not once, but twice. Better than any master she had ever known. The applause grew louder, the guests cheering, their eyes fixed on her now. She was the one trapped, the one mocked by her own game. She tried to smile, but her lips trembled. It was only a joke, she whispered, but her voice was too soft. No one believed her. The janitor's eyes met hers, steady, calm, and unbroken. For the first time in her life, she felt small before someone the world had called nothing, and she realized this war had only begun. The applause faded slowly, leaving behind an uneasy silence. The air was heavy, and every guest in the hall stared at the heiress. She was the one who had made the promise, loud and clear for everyone to hear. Now she stood frozen, her smile gone, her pride cracking under the weight of her own challenge. The janitor stood calmly by the piano. His face showed no anger, no arrogance, only quiet strength. He had said nothing, but his silence spoke louder than any word. He had proven himself, and now the world was watching to see what the heiress would do. One of the guests, a man with silver hair and sharp eyes, cleared his throat. "You promised him marriage," he said, his voice cutting through the silence. "And he has proven himself. What will you do now?" Murmurs rose again. The guests whispered among themselves, excitement mixing with disbelief. Some laughed nervously, others leaned closer, hungry to see her next move. The heiress's cheeks burned. She had always been the one who controlled the room, the one who mocked others without fear. But now the power was gone, taken by a janitor. She had never noticed before tonight. Her pride screamed for her to dismiss it as a joke, but her heart told her that would not work. The eyes of everyone in the hall demanded an answer. She forced a smile, though it trembled. "Very well," she said slowly. "He has played impressively, but marriage? That was only a game. Surely none of you believed I meant it." The guests laughed weakly, but their laughter lacked strength. Some of them exchanged doubtful looks. The old woman in silver who had first applauded frowned deeply. The janitor finally spoke, his voice calm and steady. "You said if I played, you would marry me. Everyone here heard you." The heiress's smile broke for a moment, her eyes narrowing. She opened her mouth to argue, but before she could speak, another voice rose from the crowd. "He deserves respect," said a young man in a tuxedo, his tone firm. "You mocked him. Yet he played better than anyone I've ever heard. You cannot simply laugh it away." The guests murmured louder now, some nodding, some clapping lightly in agreement. The heiress's control of the hall was slipping faster. Then she could hold it. Her mind raced. She could not marry a janitor. To her, it was unthinkable. Yet if she refused openly, she would be branded a liar, a coward, a fool who could not keep her word. Her reputation would crumble before the very people whose respect she craved. The janitor's eyes stayed on her, steady and calm, not pleading, not demanding, just waiting. That patience cut deeper than anger ever could. Finally, she laughed again. But the sound was brittle. "If marriage is what you want, then prove more. One performance means nothing. Play again, something greater, something impossible." Then perhaps I will decide." The guests gasped, some in awe, some in disapproval. The old woman shook her head, whispering, "She is moving the goal again." The janitor nodded slowly, not rising to her challenge with words. He sat once more at the piano, adjusting his gloves slightly, his fingers hovering above the keys. Hall fell silent again. Every guest leaned closer, breathless with anticipation. The heiress folded her arms, trying to appear in control, but her eyes betrayed her nervousness. Then the janitor began to play. This time, the music was not just powerful, it was alive. His fingers moved with speed and grace, weaving notes together like threads of light. The melody carried strength, but also pain, the pain of years spent unseen, years spent mocked, years spent cleaning floors while his gift lay hidden. The guests closed their eyes, letting the music carry them. Some felt their hearts ache. Others felt tears prick their eyes. The chandeliers glowed brighter, as though the very light bent toward the sound. The heiress gripped the side of the piano again, her chest rising and falling quickly. She had wanted to expose him as a fool, but instead, each note stripped away her own mask. The music touched something deep inside her, a place she had long forgotten. It showed her the emptiness of her wealth, the loneliness hidden behind her. Pride. The janitor's music climbed higher, rising like a storm reaching its peak. The air itself seemed to tremble, the floor vibrating beneath their feet. Then, suddenly the storm broke into silence. When the final note faded, the room was filled with gasps and whispers. Some guests stood, clapping furiously, their faces shining with wonder. Others sat frozen, unable to believe what they had just heard. The heiress's hands shook. She could not hide it anymore. Her pride was wounded, her heart exposed. She stared at the janitor as though seeing him for the first time, not as a servant, but as something far greater. He rose slowly, his eyes still calm. He had no need to ask again. Everyone in the hall already knew the truth. He had won. The heiress turned away for a moment, her golden hair falling across her face. Her mind screamed against it, but her soul whispered a truth she could not silence. This was no game anymore, and she realized that every step forward from this moment would change her life forever. The hall was still trembling with the memory of the music. Applause had shaken the walls, but now it faded into whispers, uncertain and sharp, as though everyone had too many words trapped in their throats. The heiress stood in the center, her red dress glowing under the chandeliers, but her power was gone. The eyes of the crowd no longer followed her with admiration. They followed the janitor. She could feel it. Their attention, their respect, their awe, all stolen by a man in a blue uniform with yellow gloves. Her chest tightened. She had never felt so small, so powerless. In her own ballroom, the janitor stood calmly by the piano, his hands resting lightly on the wood. He had played with everything inside him, but he looked neither proud nor boastful. He simply looked complete, as if the music itself had spoken all he needed to say. The old woman in silver stepped forward again, her voice strong though her eyes glistened with tears. "This man is no servant tonight. He is an artist. And you, child, you made a promise before us all." The crowd murmured louder, emboldened now. Words floated through the air like sparks. She must keep her word. He deserves it. She mocked him first. The heiress's fingers curled into fists. Heat burned her face, but not from shame alone. It was from fear. If she agreed, her life would change forever. If she refused, her name would be ruined among her peers. Every path looked like a trap. She began, her voice shaking. She stopped, swallowing hard. The room waited. The chandeliers flickered, as though even the light leaned closer. "I did not mean." Her words stumbled, collapsing under the weight of 100 staring eyes. It was only a joke. The whispers turned harsh. Some gasped in disapproval, others shook their heads. The old woman's voice rose above them all. A joke? Marriage is not a toy, child. Your words bind you. Do not think you can laugh at honor. The heiress's pride cracked further. She wanted to scream at the old woman, to silence the crowd. But deep inside, another feeling grew. A quiet, uninvited truth. When she had listened to the janitor's music, her heart had moved in ways wealth had never touched. That frightened her more than the crowd's judgment. The janitor finally spoke, his voice steady, carrying through the hall like another note from his piano. I did not ask for marriage, he said softly. You offered it. I only asked to play. The guest stirred again. His words cut the air like a blade. He was not demanding. He was reminding them all of the truth. The heiress felt her throat tighten. He was right. He had not begged. He had not forced. She had mocked him, and her own arrogance had created this fire. For the first time, her laughter failed her. Instead, her voice cracked, raw and uncertain. Who are you? You cannot be only a janitor. No one plays like that. The janitor looked at her, his eyes calm but deep, as though holding storms within them. I am only who I am, he answered. A man who works, a man who plays, nothing more. But to the guests, he was far more. They saw it in the way he stood, the way his silence commanded the room better than her wealth ever had. They saw genius, strength, and dignity where once they had seen nothing. The heiress stepped back, her heart pounding. She tried to lift her chin in defiance, but the weight of his presence made it hard. For the first time, she felt like the one being tested. The silver-haired man from earlier spoke again, his tone sharp. You have two choices now. Keep your word or lose your honor. The whole city will hear of this night. The guests nodded. Some with satisfaction, others with excitement. They loved drama, but they also loved truth when it exposed someone else. The heiress's pride battled her fear. She wanted to shout that she would never marry a janitor. She wanted to dismiss him. Again, to turn the crowd's laughter back on him. But deep inside, she knew the truth. She could not erase the sound of his music. She could not erase the way it had reached into her soul, tearing down walls she had built her whole life. Her voice wavered. And if I refuse? The room grew tense. No one dared answer, but the silence itself was clear. If she refused, she would become the fool. Her name would be dragged through whispers for years to come. The janitor's gaze did not move. He did not speak again. He did not need to. The hall itself spoke for him. The heiress trembled. She hated him for what he had done, not for humiliating her, but for showing her a truth she did not want to see. She had thought him beneath her. But now, standing before him, she felt like the one unworthy. Her heart screamed to escape, but her lips whispered a different truth. Then play again. Not for me. For all of us. The janitor nodded once, silent as always. He sat again at the piano, and when his fingers touched the keys, the world outside the hall seemed to vanish, leaving only the music that carried them all towards something greater than themselves. The ballroom was silent again, but this silence felt different. It was not the silence of mockery or arrogance. It was the silence of people who had witnessed something beyond explanation. The janitor's hands rested on the piano, his chest rising and falling with slow, steady breaths. He looked neither proud nor nervous. He looked complete, as if every note had spoken in his place. The heiress's heart was beating too fast. She felt trapped in her own body, her pride screaming against the truth, her soul whispering something she did not want to hear. She had lived her whole life as if the world belonged to her. Money, respect, attention, it had always been hers. But tonight, all of that power had slipped into the hands of a man she once thought invisible. The guests shifted uneasily, their eyes moving between her and the janitor. The challenge was no longer just about music. It was about her word, her honor, her pride. You cannot keep running from it. The old woman in silver said again, her voice strong and clear. You gave your word before all of us. The heiress's lips trembled. She wanted to shout back, to declare that she would never marry a man like him. But each time she looked at the janitor, her words froze. He was not begging. He was not demanding. He simply stood, unshaken, with the dignity of someone who had already won. Her chest tightened. How could a janitor make her feel so powerless? The few silver-haired man from earlier stepped forward. If you do not honor your word, he said, your name will carry shame far beyond this hall. You will not escape it. The crowd murmured, agreeing. Some nodded, others whispered, their eyes gleaming with the hunger for scandal. They had always followed her laughter, but now they turned against her silence. The heiress felt herself drowning. She turned to the janitor, her eyes desperate. Why? She asked softly, her voice breaking. Why would you even accept such a promise? Do you think you belong in my world? The janitor's gaze met hers, calm and steady. I belong where truth is, he answered. I did not force this. You offered. I only played. His words struck deeper than any insult. They reminded her, and everyone listening, that he had never begged, never chased her. It was her pride that had pulled him into this stage, and his genius that had carried him to victory. The guests shifted again, murmuring louder. Some clapped lightly in agreement. Others stared at her with sharp eyes, waiting. The heiress's throat tightened. For the first time, she felt tears pressing against her eyes. She turned away quickly, not wanting anyone to see her weakness. But inside, the music still echoed, pulling at her heart, tearing down walls she had built her whole life. She had mocked him as a fool. Yet the more she listened to the memory of his music, the more she realized he was not the fool. She was. The old woman's voice broke the silence again. Child, you have been given a gift tonight. Do not throw it away. The heiress clenched, her fists, her body trembling. She could feel the weight of every eye on her, pressing her to decide. Her pride fought to escape, but her soul was already bending under the truth. Finally, she turned back to the janitor. Her lips parted, her voice shaking but clear enough for all to hear. I cannot deny it anymore. You played like no one I have ever heard. You are more than what I believed. The guests gasped, leaning closer. But marriage, she whispered, her voice softer now, almost breaking. Marriage is not a game. And I do not know if I can. Her words trailed off, caught between fear and truth. The janitor did not move. His silence was not cruel, it was patient. He stood as if the world itself would wait for her answer. The heiress's chest rose and fell quickly. She could feel her pride shattering, piece by piece. And for the first time in her life, she realized she did not want to laugh anymore. She wanted to listen. The guests began to chant lightly, their voices pressing against her ears. Keep your word. Keep your word. Keep your word. Her knees weakened. She placed a hand on the piano for balance, her heart trembling inside her chest. If I agree, she whispered, almost to herself, then my life will never be the same. The janitor's eyes softened, but his voice remained steady. No life remains the same after truth. The hall grew silent once more. Everyone waited. The chandeliers sparkled above, as if holding their breath with the crowd. The heiress closed her eyes, fighting one last battle inside herself. Pride against truth, fear against courage, and when she opened them again, her eyes were wet but her voice was steady. Then, I will keep my word. The hall erupted in gasps, some in cheers, others in stunned silence. The heiress stood trembling, her pride shattered, but her soul lighter than it had ever been. The janitor bowed his head slightly, not in triumph, but in respect. And for the first time in her life, the heiress felt she was not the one in control. And strangely, It did not feel like defeat. It felt like the beginning of something she had never known. The ballroom erupted with voices. Some clapped, others gasped, and a few whispered in shock. The heiress stood trembling, her words still echoing in the air. She had promised to keep her word. For a woman who had built her life on power, laughter, and control, it was the hardest thing she had ever said. The janitor remained calm, his steady gaze resting on her. He did not smile, he did not gloat. He simply stood, silent as always, his presence commanding the room more than her wealth ever had. The old woman in silver stepped forward, her eyes soft but proud. "Tonight, we have all witnessed truth," she said. "It was not money that silenced us. It was not power, it was music, played by a man who refused to bow to mockery." She looked at the heiress. "And you, child, have learned what pride cannot teach." The heiress's throat tightened. She wanted to argue, to hold on to the fragments of her pride, but the truth was too heavy. The music still lived inside her chest, reminding her of the moment her walls had fallen. The guests surrounded the janitor, their eyes filled with admiration. Some shook his hand, others praised his skill. A man in a tuxedo whispered, "You are no janitor, you are a master." But the janitor only nodded politely. "I am who I am," he said again, his words simple, but they carried more weight than any speech the guests had ever heard. The heiress watched in silence, her heart twisting. For years, she had believed herself untouchable, the center of every room. Now she stood on the edge, watching as the man she once mocked became the center of everything. Her hands trembled at her sides. She had agreed to marry him, but marriage was more than words. It was a step she had never imagined, a door into a world she did not understand. Slowly she stepped closer. The crowd parted, their eyes following her every move. She stopped in front of the janitor, her eyes uncertain, her voice low. "I do not know how to live without my pride," she admitted softly. "But when you played, I felt something I have never felt before. Maybe that is worth more than pride." The janitor looked at her, his eyes calm. "Pride fades," he said gently. "Truth remains," her lips trembled. For once, she could not laugh, could not mock. Instead, she bowed her head, a gesture no one had ever seen from her before. It was not defeat. It was surrender to something greater. The guests erupted again, cheering, clapping, shouting. To them, it was the perfect story. The proud heiress humbled, the forgotten janitor rising to glory. They would remember this night for the rest of their lives, telling it again and again as if it were a legend. But to the heiress, it was something else. It was the start of a journey she did not understand, but could no longer refuse. The old woman in silver lifted her glass high. "Tonight, honor has been kept," she declared, "and may it guide us all." The guests followed, raising their glasses, their voices filling the hall. The chandeliers sparkled brighter, the golden walls glowing with warmth as though the music still lingered. The janitor turned once more to the piano. His hands touched the keys again, and a softer melody filled the room. It was gentle this time, tender, like a promise whispered in the dark. The guests swayed, smiling, their hearts lighter. The heiress closed her eyes. For the first time she felt peace. Not the peace of wealth, not the comfort of power, but the peace of truth. She did not know what tomorrow would bring, but she knew. Tonight had changed her forever. The janitor's music carried through the hall, rising and falling like a heartbeat. And as the final note faded into silence, the world seemed to stand still, holding on to the moment as though it would never let go. The heiress looked at him once more, her eyes softer than they had ever been. "I mocked you," she whispered. "And yet, you have shown me who I really am. Perhaps that is the true gift." The janitor said nothing, but his silence was answer enough. The night ended not with laughter, but with music, with truth, with a promise that the world would never forget. Asterisk.